Mexico and the United States say they want to strengthen their security cooperation. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio agreed at a meeting to continue working together to stop the flow of fentanyl and other drugs into the U.S. and the smuggling of weapons into Mexico. Now, the announcement comes a day after the U.S. military carried out a missile strike on a boat that Washington said belonged to a Venezuelan drug cartel. 11 people were killed in the attack, all of them allegedly members of the Tren de Aragua gang, which the U.S. has designated as a terrorist organization. Now, Secretary Rubio said Tuesday's missile strike wouldn't be the last.
Maybe it's happening right now, I don't know. But the point is, the President of the United States is going to wage war on narco-terrorist organizations. This one was operating in international waters, headed towards the United States to flood our country with poison. And under President Trump, those days are over.
Pamela Starr is an expert on U.S.-Mexican relations and senior advisor to business advisory firm Monarch Global Strategies. Welcome to DW News, Pamela. Now, looking at this strike on the boat, do you see this as the beginning of a new era in the U.S. war on drugs?
There's no doubt that this is very different from what the United States has historically done in the war on drugs. Historically, we've used the Coast Guard mainly as the tool to interdict drugs coming to the United States through the Caribbean. And now we've got an entire naval task force in the Southern Caribbean that's in order to do this. There's also a lot of saber-rattling threats that and indications that maybe we might be going after the president of Venezuela himself. I think that's unlikely, but nevertheless, the level of threat that the United States is employing is something we've never done before in the war on drugs.
Yeah, just going to ask, is there some kind of comparison to be made, as some observers have done, to the long history of U.S. military intervention in Latin America?
I don't know that there's a comparison to be made, but certainly sending this task force into off the Venezuelan coast reminds Latin America of a long history of U.S. intervention in the region, sending in the Marines, occupying countries. For over 100 years, the United States has been the hegemon in the region. And so this doesn't generate well-being or a good feeling toward the United States in Latin America as a result of this. That said, I think it's very different than the history of intervention. Historically, the United States intervened not to fight drug trafficking, but to overthrow governments that we were uncomfortable with the very important exception of the invasion to overthrow the Noriega regime in Panama in 1989.
Right. Pamela, I'd like to get your thoughts on this statement made a few days ago by Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, which some have viewed as a threat or warning to the U.S. Let's take a listen.
Under no circumstances will the people of Mexico accept interventions, interference, or any other act from abroad that is detrimental to the integrity, independence, and sovereignty of our nation.
Pamela, do you think it's conceivable that the U.S. would attack a suspected drug cartel boat on Mexican territory?
I think it's much less likely than on Venezuelan territory. And it's less likely because what President Sheinbaum said is not a threat. It's a fact of life. Mexico simply will not accept U.S. military forces on Mexican territory unless it's with the express permission of the Mexican government in a bilateral fashion. If the United States crosses that very red line, Mexico will cease cooperation with the United States in drug trafficking, and I think the United States understands that.
Right. Now, President Sheinbaum has so far attempted to maintain a pragmatic relationship with U.S. President Trump, despite his previous harsh comments about Mexicans. Do you think this strategy is working?
I think it's working extraordinarily well, actually. The security accord that the two countries agreed to today in Mexico City has incorporated in it direct respect for Mexican sovereignty, which is something that President Sheinbaum insisted upon. It's also was very interesting that after the meetings in the press conference with Secretary Rubio and Mexican Foreign Minister, Rubio said the following. He said, "No government is cooperating more with the United States in this moment than the government of Mexico, the government of Sheinbaum." So it's something the United States, I think, doesn't want to risk losing that cooperation with Mexico by going too far, even though there is pressure within the Trump administration to use the military. But in addition to security, Mexico has the lowest effective tariff rate, one of the lowest, in the world, much lower than most of its competitors in the U.S. market and very much lower than China. So far, so good. And it's a final note that President Trump has very positive words to say about President Sheinbaum. He refers to her as a terrific woman, as an elegant, beautiful woman, as someone that he can work with. That's very high praise from Donald Trump, and I think it's a demonstration of the success that Mexico's had in this bilateral relationship thus far.
Okay, Pamela Starr, expert on U.S.-Mexican relations. We appreciate your insights. Thank you very much.